Okay, everybody, welcome to Magnolia United Church of Christ January Learning Firearm Part 2, all around end of life care planning and options. So thank you all for coming back for Part 2. We have the amazing, talented, and wonderful Janet Ott with us tonight. And before we dive into Janet's section, I just want to do a quick check-in and see if there was any questions, comments, reactions, follow-up from last week before we begin again. Anybody have anything to share, questions, anything outstanding?
This is Becky here. I just wanted to say I thought that it was really, really helpful information. I'm very grateful to have it.
Thanks, Becky. Good to have you here tonight. Okay, well then I'd encourage you, Janet, how would you prefer folks handle questions? Do you want them to go in the chat and I'll let you know? Do you want to keep them till the end?
Yeah, I think we can do both, Marcy. If you have questions while I'm talking, please.
Oh, wait a minute. Janet, I muted you because I muted everybody and I should have not muted you. So can you unmute yourself?
Okay, there.
There.
Yeah, I think in terms of questions, if people would put them in the chat while I'm talking, and I can monitor the chat too, and then I will finish before 8, and then I will have time for questions also and discussion. So yeah, let's do both.
Great. Okay, then we're all set. Take it away, Janet.
Hey, if you were not here last week, I'm Janet. I'm a member of First Congregational Church in Bellingham. I live in Bellingham. And my passion is helping people thrive while they are alive and have a good, peaceful, dignified death. I'm a retired hospice nurse and psychotherapist. And right now, I spend all of my time working with End of Life Washington. And I will be talking about several things tonight. I'm going to talk about, last week we talked about advanced planning, and in the hope that, because both Charmin and I have passion that people have conversations about this topic, especially at our age. I'm 78 and I'm a widow, so I have to make sure all my stuff is ready at any time. But it seems like death, sex, and taxes, it's not a cliche to say that we don't tend to talk about those things in our culture. And so our passion is that people start, and not waiting until you're 78, but at any time, since we never know how long we have in this body, that we have conversations about what we want, and that we have done the advanced planning so that we have some control over our end of life. And so last week was advanced planning, and I believe Marcy's going to send out, if she didn't already, the websites that were mentioned last week. And those websites also cover tonight's talk. So I'm going to talk about several things. I'm going to talk about what options do we have in terms of being in charge or control over our own death. And then what options do we have for after death other than the normal being buried or cremated in our culture. So it's interesting, if you do the research and look at the statistics on aging, the biggest fear of people aging is getting dementia. And I'm not going to quote all the studies, but basically that's what they all can conclude, because of the course of the disease and how it ends, and I'm going to deal directly with what people with dementia can do around being in charge of their death. But unfortunately, in our culture, there isn't much at this point. But options that we do have currently, if we have a disease that is terminal, we are suffering, and people choose to end their lives for all kinds of reasons. And I've been helping people die for 4 years now, and I mean, I think the most common reason people want to use medical aid in dying is that they're done. They're just done with suffering. They've had a long-term chronic terminal disease and they're just done. They have no longer have quality of life. So that speaks to the issue that I really believe all of us need to do some discernment around what is quality of life for us. And what I have noticed is that my definition of that changes as I age. But I think it's important for us all to know, well, when under what conditions is life worth living? Do I feel fully alive? And under what conditions do I no longer want to continue in this body? So it's fear of pain and suffering, because some diseases are not easy deaths. That's just the truth. And we hospice nurses have a list of things that we would use other options for if we were ever diagnosed. Sometimes it's fear of being dependent and having a caregiver, a spouse or a family member having to take care of them. But usually it's just, boy, I have suffered so long on this, or the suffering is so bad. This life is not worth living. One man told me, he goes, I want to end my life as soon as I can no longer get out of bed. Because if I can't walk around, he lived alone. He said, if I can't walk and move around, then I'm done. So we have several options. One is just to stop treatment. And I think that's what we have customarily used in our culture, is that, okay, I'm done with chemo. I'm done with radiation. And what is often happens with stopping treatment is people stop dialysis, which will usually end, if they don't have a transplant, in death. Another option is palliative sedation. I think you've heard that term. This is usually used for people who already are on hospice, and usually they are in a facility like a hospice house or an inpatient hospice program. It can be done at home. What you need to know about palliative sedation, which is just large doses of morphine or other pain killing meds, the patient usually is unconscious. If you have palliative sedation, you are going to be unconscious. And there's people that don't want that. So another option today, and I'm going to speak to this around dementia, because medical aid in dying, unfortunately, has some very strict requirements. Basically, you have to have a 6-month prognosis. So you have to have a very serious terminal illness, which is determined by a doctor, 6-month prognosis. And you have to be mentally competent to make decisions. So that eliminates a lot of things a lot of diseases in our culture, as I'll talk about later. But the nice thing about voluntary stopping eating and drinking, which, by the way, I just want to say, Bellingham or Whatcom County has the only VSED resources institute in the country. It was started by a friend of mine who is a death doula and an RN, and there's a website, vsedresources.com, and it has everything you want to ever know about voluntary stopping eating and drinking. Here's why VSED is mushrooming, because it's legal. You don't have to go through any legal loops to do it. Anyone can do it. And it can be used for early stage dementia. Now, I stress early stage because you must have, to do voluntary stopping eating and drinking, you must have mental capacity, decision-making capacity, because that has to be determined, and you have to have an advance directive. You can have an advance directive for VSED, but you have to sign a document that's saying you know what you're doing and what it's going to result in. So it can only be used for early stage dementia. And I've seen it used many times when a person is in the middle stages of dementia, because they make the decision early in the disease and they wait. But they still need to be able to, like, if they get thirsty or hungry and say, hey, I want to drink, or I want to eat something, you need to be able to remind them, hey, you made a decision. Remember, you decided that you were going to stop eating and drinking so you could die before you reach the late stages of dementia. Okay, I remember now. So they need reminders. And as someone said, in early stages of dementia, people may choose to end their life to give up good days to avoid bad years. That's basically what you're doing. So you need an advance directive, and you must have mental capacity to make that decision. You cannot wait too long. The other things about voluntary stopping eating and drinking, and I'm just going to say, because it's not simple. You must have a 24/7 caregiver, and that can be a family member, or you can be a paid caregiver. And you really do need a 24/7 caregiver, because there are medications to alleviate any discomforts. There are mouth care things that are done, because the hunger ends pretty quick, but the thirst can remain till the person is unconscious. And so there's all kinds of mouth care and things that we do as caregivers to alleviate that. And you should be on hospice. And we also recommend that you have a death doula. So if you are interested in more information about, I want to say too that the other kind of downside of it is it takes 5 to 15 days to die. And if you go to the website, VSED Resources, you'll see lots of videos that were done by patients who chose VSED. They're quite moving, actually. And what is striking is that it is for the most part, it is a very easy, peaceful way to die, because the last days, the person is in a coma. So they're not even conscious. And the hunger goes very quickly. And we can live a long time without food. It's the fluids that is ultimately what causes our death. And so the hunger goes very quickly, but there can be symptoms of like dry mouth, or people are thirsty. My spouse died of voluntary stopping eating and drinking. So I've been through this, of caring for someone with this, and but eventually the symptoms go away, and there is a euphoria, and then there's a coma. So it really isn't. It is a very peaceful way to go, and it may take 10 to 15 days, and it is legal. Anyone can do it. But there is some legal forms you have to fill out to verify that you have chosen this, that you have mental capacity to choose it, that no one's pressuring you, and so that after death there's no inquiry, or why did this patient die like this? So that's all I'm going to say about. And if you go to End of Life Washington website, that I believe Marcy's going to share that link with you. They have a beautiful checklist and description of VSED. They tell you everything you need to know about it. You can also go to vsedresources.com. And boy, there's a ton of videos from patients that are doing it right up to the moment of death. There's all the information you need. And we are really blessed in this state to have VSED resources, because we're the only state in the country that has that organization. And they give you a list of caregivers, if you call them, that are used to taking care of people that are doing VSED. They can give you a list of death doulas. They can really walk you through this process. And so can end-of-life volunteers. I would say in End of Life Washington, the people using VSED, it's just skyrocketing. And it's usually people who do not qualify for medical aid in dying. So I'm going to talk about medical aid in dying. And in Washington State, we passed the law for the first time in 2009. So we've had this since 2009. There are only 10 states plus the District of Columbia currently in the United States that have a law allowing medical aid in dying. And I just want to say, because I have testified in the legislature 2 years ago in 2023, we made the law more humane. It was a lot of work, and I testified in Olympia. And so I got to hear all the people who were against it. And the people who are against it are still calling it. And I want to bring this to your attention because you're going to hear this term, and you're going to be educated after tonight. And I want you to correct people. You'll still hear the term physician-assisted suicide. It is not physician-assisted suicide. It is not suicide. We always say the disease is killing the patient. The patient is just deciding when. And so on your death certificate, if you choose medical aid in dying, it says metastatic breast cancer or pancreatic cancer or ALS. It does not say medical aid in dying. It does not affect your life insurance because it is not suicide. And it is the opponents of this law that call it that because in their religious beliefs, they believe suicide is wrong. It is not suicide. These people are dying anyway. So Vermont, so there are 10 states that have it. We're one of them, and we are really blessed to have this law. Vermont and Oregon just updated their law to make it much more humane than ours because in Washington, you must be a resident of Washington to use this law here in Washington. And trust me, we get calls every day from people in Utah and Idaho begging to come here and use medical aid in dying. And we have to say no. But Vermont and Oregon have now rescinded their residency requirement. So that means anybody can go to Vermont and Oregon and use medical aid in dying. So if you have a family member there or a place where you can go, like some place to stay, you can use this law in those two states. So I think we're all hoping that someday Washington will get rid of the residency requirement. But right now it still exists. So you must be 18 years of age or older, and you must be medically competent to make an informed decision at the time of your request. And actually at the time, so End of Life Washington calls the day that you take the medication, they call that the day of ingestion. I call it graduation day, but that's my belief system, and my patients like that term, but so I will use that here, that including the day of graduation, you must be able to know what you are doing. And because before I hand the medication to anyone, I say, tell me what's going to happen after you take this. Is anyone pressuring you to do this? And if they cannot tell me what's going to happen, then I will not give it to them. So there must be decision-making abilities, and some patients wait too long to take the medication, and they no longer have that decision-making ability. They are no longer cognitively alert. You must be terminally ill with a life expectancy of 6 months or less. And we all know that that's subjective. The nurses in the group know that. But a doctor has to, a doctor or some health provider, a nurse practitioner or a PAC has to certify that you have a 6-month prognosis. Now you can just imagine the challenge with some of our really ugly diseases. Dementia does not have a 6-month prognosis. ALS does not have a 6-month prognosis unless you are quite advanced in the disease. There are other diseases that do not have 6-month prognosis. Therefore, they would not qualify for medical aid in dying. The other requirement is the patient has to be able to self-administer the medications. So what that means is most people, it's a powder that we mix with about 2 ounces of syrup, and I hand it to them, and they have to be able to take it from me and drink it. If they cannot drink, they cannot swallow, we can administer it through a gastrostomy tube, which is a lot of ALS patients use, and we can also do rectal administration. But in both of those cases, technically, the law requires that the person push the plunger on the syringe. So you can imagine that people who do not have use of their hands would have trouble doing that. That's all I'm going to say about that. So in order to use the law, so we suggest, and by the way, I'm just going to say again, we are blessed to live in Washington State, because in Washington State, of the 10 states that have this law, we are the only ones that have an organization like End of Life Washington. End of Life Washington is a nonprofit organization that is no longer, it's all virtual now because we don't have the money to have an office anymore. We are financially supported only by donations. We get no money from the state or from the counties or the cities. And we get donations from donors and people who have used, as families of people who have used the law. And so we have about 5 staff, but we're mostly, almost all the work is done by volunteers, of which I'm one of them. They're called VCA, Volunteer Client Advisors, volunteer physicians. And there are hospices now in Washington State that will do all the work that we volunteers do, but they are not Catholic hospices, because Catholic hospices will not participate. So Hospice of the Northwest down in Skagit, really, they don't even need volunteers in Skagit anymore, because they do everything. They help you get the prescription and do all the dot the I's and cross the T's that we do with people. But what we recommend in Washington State is that if someone thinks they want to do this, that they contact End of Life Washington. As soon as they fill out the form online, they are assigned a volunteer like me. And our job is to help them navigate the legal process so they can get the prescription in the pharmacy, so they can use it if they ever choose to. And I really want to emphasize that currently the stats show that of the people who get the prescription, only 25% ever take it. And that's for so many reasons. Some people die naturally. They just realize it's not so bad because they're on hospice and they have pain control and they have symptom control. Or they can go to a hospice house or inpatient, and so their spouse doesn't have to take care of them. Or the most common reason, truthfully, is that they wait too long to contact us and they become unqualified during the waiting period. So there is a waiting period. The first step is that you make an oral request with your current physician. They have to write it in your chart, and any Catholic medical institution can do this. They have to legally do it. They're just write in your chart, patient is interested in medical aid in dying. That's called the first oral request. And that's when the clock starts ticking. And it used to be a 3-week waiting period before you could get the prescription from the time you made that request. Well, so many people died in that 3 weeks that we went to the legislature and said, you got to make this more humane. You got to shorten this. Some states, it's only 3 days. Washington, it is now a week. And they want a week's waiting period so that you can change your mind. So this is not an impulsive decision. So after you make that first oral request, then you talk to one of us and we find you two medical providers. You need 2 medical providers, one who will write the prescription for the medication and one who will determine that your prognosis is 6 months and that you have cognitive capacity. They usually do these visits by telemed because patients are pretty sick and can't go into their office. If you are a patient of Fred Hutch, their doctors do this automatically. If you are a patient with certain hospices in the state, they have physicians that do this. If you are a patient with a Catholic hospice, my job is to find you 2 doctors who are volunteers who are willing to be your 2 physicians or 2 providers, because we can now do nurse practitioners and we can do physician's assistants. That's part of the new law. So once they determine that you have a 6-month prognosis and that you have decision-making ability, then you make another oral request. You fill out a written request, which with 2 witnesses. They are so careful that you are not being pressured or that you know what you're doing. And then you get the prescription in the pharmacy. The doctor writes the prescription. Now, here's the good news. Well, the bad news is it's expensive. It's about $750 to $800, which again we feel is very inhumane. It's a mixture of 6 drugs that are in powder form. So we say to people, you don't have to pay for it until you pick it up. It can sit there for a year. You have a year to use it and you don't pay for it. So if you never use it, you never pay. We tell people to pick it up after they set a date, 2 days before they plan to take it. And I will say, in all my work with people, picking the date is the hardest thing for most people, because there's always one more thing that we want to be alive for, whether it's our granddaughter's graduation or to see who wins the World Series or the presidential election or whatever. So for some people, picking the date is a challenge. And as your volunteer, I would encourage you to talk about it's your life and it's your death. So do it, since you are choosing the time and place, do it in a way that is in alignment with who you are. So some of my patients have had going away parties where they had toasts and celebrations, and then they went into their bedroom and took the medication. Some of them, I say, decide if you want music. What rituals do you want? Some want spiritual rituals, some don't. Who do you want there? And that can be that takes a lot of discernment. Like, well, which of my family members do I want here? And then I often, if there are family members who do not support this, like they're really hostile or angry, I work with them and try to educate them and help them. And that's where being a therapist really comes in handy. But and a lot of families get to the point where they say, I wish they weren't doing this, but because I love them, I will support them because I know they're suffering. And it wouldn't be my choice. I wish they wouldn't do it. But that is a fine place to get to. So I encourage people to think about rituals and what they want for their day of graduation. I tell them that I will come and mix it and hand it to them if they wish. And we recommend that because we want the family just to focus on loving them and not have that as their last memory of mixing the medication and handing it to them. I have coached family members over the phone to do it. I've had one. I must say, I'm just going to be very personal right now. I don't know how many deaths I've had in the last 3 years, probably 30 or 40. I've lost count. But I would say most times I absolutely have fallen in love with my patient and their families, because sometimes we have a long-term relationship for maybe 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months. And I have just met the most amazing people. And I just have amazing stories. And I'll just share one. A gentleman who lived in rural Washington, and he had pancreatic cancer and had suffered for many years from this, many surgeries and much chemo. And he was just a shadow of his former self. And he said, "Can I die under my favorite tree?" And he had 20 acres along a river in rural Washington. And he had planted the cedar tree, and it was now huge. He was in his 70s. He said, can I die? Can I take the medication under the tree? And I said, sure, if your family can carry you back into the house afterwards, I'm willing to do that. So when people drink the medication, what happens is they usually fall asleep within 3 to 5 minutes. And death occurs within 20 minutes to several hours, and it really depends on so many factors. But I tell them I can guarantee they will never wake up once they fall asleep, no matter how long it takes. Um, so in those 3 to 4 minutes, 5 minutes, I always say, is there anything you want to say to your family before you fall asleep? And I've been writing down last words because I'm going to write a book one day. But this man's last words, I just want to share these with you because most people say, well, I'm really out of here. I'm really done. Oh, I can't wait to go. People are so ready the day of death. It is just so, it is so, I feel like I'm giving them such a gift because they are so eager to go. And this man, his last words were, oh, it's starting to work. And it is so beautiful. Trust me, this is so beautiful. And he fell asleep. And I'll never forget that because it was really a gift to his family. I'll share one other. There was a 94-year-old man who lived alone. It was my first death. That's why I remember it. And he was Buddhist. And he came to the door when we knocked on the door and he bowed. And he said, oh, thank goodness you're here. I am so eager. And his family told me that it was the first night he had slept since he had cancer, like 8 years before that. It was the first night he had a good night's sleep because he was so relieved about his death the next day. And he lived alone. He didn't want to be dependent on anyone, and he had had cancer for so long. And he said when we got in there, because we usually have to mix it and we do sort of thing, he said, just hurry up. I just want to go so badly. And his son, his grown son, was a physician. And so his son sat beside him and monitored his pulse. And after the man died, the son turned to me and said, you know, I've seen probably 1,000 people die in my career. And I've never seen such a peaceful, dignified death in my entire life. And I have to say, it is the deaths that I have done are so peaceful and dignified. It is just really a beautiful way to go. So that's basically what happens. And then I require that my patients be on hospice. So after they die, and I usually have the hospice nurse there, hospice just calls for the after death, whatever funeral home they have requested. I recommend, I don't recommend, I insist that they are on hospice because if they are not on hospice when they take the medication, after they die, you must call, and it depends on what county you're in, you must call the coroner or the medical examiner or EMS because it's quote, not a natural death. And so, which is just awful. And you don't have to do that when they're on hospice. So that's, my patients usually get on hospice right away as soon as I tell them that. But EMS has learned, they are so supportive up here. They've learned not to put the sirens on and not to put and there's always a pulse on the refrigerator. And we just say, oh, this patient chose medical aid in dying. They go, fine, bye. But that differs from county to county, how supportive they are of that. So I guess before I move on to after death options, I just want to take questions or comments about either VSED or medical aid in dying, because I know I've said a lot and I just want to see what questions you have or comments. So I don't.
Chris has her hand up.
Okay, Chris?
Yeah, go off mute, Chris.
Yeah, I have a quick question. What if you have a chronic disease and it progresses and they're telling you that you should do this and you don't want to do that? Can you choose palliative care or just choose not to do that and still be in control of your destiny?
Well, boy, that's a tough question to give you a specific answer to. I would say it really would depend on the disease. I am a big supporter of palliative care. So palliative care is different from hospice in
Yes.
places because they help you learn to live, have
Mhm.
rich, fulfilling life in spite of having a chronic disease.
Mhm.
And it can be inpatient or outpatient. Hospice is when you have, hospice requires that you discontinue treatment.
The 6-month thing, yeah.
Well, and yeah, and yes, they have a 6 month, yeah, but you can graduate from hospice, and a lot of people are reluctant to go in hospice because they think it means they're going to die real soon.
Right.
The
Mhm.
statistics show that if you go in hospice, you live a lot longer. But my partner graduated from hospice after 6 months and then went back on.
Mhm.
And there are patients in our hospice that they allow them to stay on longer than 6 months. So yes, hospice is when you have discontinued treatment of any kind. You cannot be on hospice if you're getting chemo or radiation or TPN or any of that. And you you sort of need, which again is very subjective, a 6 month prognosis.
Well, it's kind of like I was thinking like kidney disease. If you're 3 and you go to 4 and then you go to 5 or whatever.
And I think with kidney disease, I mean, hospice would require that you stop dialysis. And
Okay.
I did have a patient that used medical aid and dying because she stopped dialysis. She said, I'm not, she got to the point where she would have to go on dialysis. And she said, I
Uh-huh.
can't do that. I'm not willing to live like that. And so
Uh-huh.
she used medical aid and dying.
Okay. Thank you. I was just curious about that. Thank you.
Sure. Well, I see somebody asked, can you spell VSED? And yeah, it's VSED, voluntary stopping eating and drinking. There's just there's no.
That was me.
Marilee, you have your hand up electronically?
I just wanted to say I visited all of those websites this week and they are very, very helpful. I learned all kinds of stuff I didn't know. So
They are
encourage
really,
everybody to get busy and read those.
yeah, there's so much information, especially on end of life. Well, and VSED resources, End of Life Washington, and Worry Free Wednesday. Yeah, they have a ton of information. I'm glad you went.
Just so people are aware, I did post them again in the chat, so you can find them again in the chat. And I
There's
think
one more-
Barbara, you have your hand. Oh, go ahead, Marilee.
There's one more thing I was going to mention. I'm part of the League of Women Voters, and one of the studies that we're doing right now is on caregiving. And
Yes.
that's another issue that we're not addressing in this thing, but they put out a wonderful study on the resources for caregivers and stuff.
Yeah,
It's for people our age to find that too.
yeah, and boy, since I had my fall and I'm in a wheelchair, I have learned a lot about caregiving too, personally. And I'm a member of League of Women Voters. We are doing the same thing up here. And that is another whole topic that I have learned in the last 2 months, being totally dependent and living alone. Boy, is that a complicated one in this state, and financially and otherwise. So yeah, that's another whole topic that maybe Marcy's going to do another forum on at some point. But yeah, but thank you for doing that work, because we really need to do some work on that issue in Washington State.
Well, it's just this study has put all the information together. It's like going to one of those great websites, it's one place to find a lot of information.
Yeah. Yeah, and fortunately, we have the Northwest Regional Council here in Washington State, which also is really helpful for caregiving. Although the VSED, if you contact VSED Resources, Nancy Simmers, who lives here in Bellingham, she will give you a list. And again, actually, no, because she mostly focuses on Whatcom County. Down where you are, End of Life Washington will give you resources. So if you contact us and say, I want to use VSED, which a lot of patients are doing these days, we will walk you through that process, and we will give you a list of caregivers that have worked with VSED. And we actually have a house in Seattle used for people who don't have a place to do it. So they're in a facility, and the facility won't let them do it there, but they can go to this house. This woman has volunteered her house for people to use medical aid and dying or VSED in. If a place where they've given up their apartment or their condo or their house. So you have some other resources down in King County, and Chris, I can't speak to Arizona. I really have no clue what's available there. Any other questions?
Yeah, so I just want to say we've got Barbara queued up and then Chris queued up. So Barbara, you're up.
Barbara?
You're on mute still, Barbara.
I know, I've never been on Zoom before. I have a couple of questions, and then I also have a couple of comments, but I can get back on the list. First question, you touched on ALS in a couple of ways.
Yes.
At one point you said ALS is difficult because there's really no, less than 6-month prognosis. And then I believe you also mentioned sometimes somebody with ALS, maybe can't or has, difficulty actually administering it. Am I remembering correctly what you said?
Got it.
Yeah. So I've always been kind of curious about this because I have a friend. Actually, he was my neighbor slash landlord for many years, who had ALS and did use this.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, and his after he died, his wife, who was a good friend of mine, told me, really, told me the whole thing, and it was an amazing experience for the family. But I was always I was curious about it did seem to me that it would be more complicated in those circumstances.
Yeah, it is. And ALS it's different in every patient. I mean, the course of the disease, I've had 3 patients with used medical aid and dying who had ALS. One waited till they most patients want to use it before they have to go in a respirator. But I had another patient use it. He could still walk with a cane. He just died about a month ago here in Whatcom County. He could still walk, but he could talk, but I couldn't understand him, but his caregiver could. But he was also not able at that point to swallow the medication, so we did rectal administration on him. And but he chose to leave pretty early in the course of his disease, although he was deteriorating rapidly, and that's what scared him. Didn't want to get to the point where he couldn't walk or couldn't breathe. I've had other patients that I followed for 6 months. They got the medication in the pharmacy, and they ended up dying naturally, and they couldn't talk to me, so they used that eye contact computer language. They would look, and their eyes could pick out letters, and it took them forever to say a sentence, but I worked with them for a long time, and he decided to just die naturally. And so ALS is it's a horrible disease, number one, but it's also very complex because it's so different in everybody. And yes, if they can't swallow, we have other ways. And yes, technically, I'm not going to say, but yes, we work with them, and it is one of the ways that this law, as stated right now, is less than humane from our perspective. But we wish it was more available to people with certain conditions. That's all.
So I think it is wonderful, and I'm very glad that I live here.
Yeah, me too.
I am very I know a lot about End of Life Washington and donate on a regular basis. And do you know Linda Allen?
She's a good friend, and she goes to my church.
Yes. Oh, yes. Well, and I was with her at your church not too long ago.
Okay.
Scott Ward, who used to be with this church.
Barbara, I'm just going to hold you. I just want to make sure we're circling through all the
That's
questions.
fine. Let's circle around and
yep. I want to go back to Chris and then check in with everyone else.
Mine's really quick. I just wanted to double check that all of this is free.
Well, here's what we say. There is no charge. because we have a lot of expenses, and we say to all of our families, if you want to thank us, best way to thank us is to donate to End of Life Washington.
Yes, that's what I understand. Okay,
It's no charge to the clients. That is
gotcha. Mm-hmm. And that's what I noted, and I appreciate that 100%. And um, V said is what I need to look at, maybe Google and look at.
And I
That
put that
well,
link in the chat, Chris, and if you want, I can email it to you too.
that's okay. That's okay. I just wanted to, I just was taking some notes and wanted to follow up.
Chris, you'll find everything that you've ever wanted to know, and with really moving videos if you go to the vsaidresources.org that Marcy
Okay, that's what I needed, resources.
End of Life also has a lot on that. Any other questions? Because I want to just quickly talk about your 3 options for after death.
Thank you.
And I have a very quick one, Janet. I'm a member of the Providence healthcare system, and in Providence, there's signs all over the place that they do not participate in this.
They don't.
But it sounds like if I went to my doctor and said I wanted this, they would be required to refer me on, or
No, they're not required to refer you on. They would be required to put your first oral request in your medical records, which is the first legal thing we must have. Every physician, any medical provider, no matter Catholic, Franciscan, has to write that in. That all they're doing is making a note in your medical records.
okay.
How it was done and what date it was done. After that, we take over, and we would find you 2 medical providers who do support this, volunteers who are not part of Providence.
Okay. And do you know if, because Providence merged with Swedish, is Swedish also not doing this?
Well, if they are now a Catholic hospital, that is correct. However, I just want to say something like our hospital up here is Catholic, Peace Health.
Yep.
And our hospice, we have 2 hospices. We have Eden, which I believe you have down there, which is brand new. Eden is not affiliated with the Catholic hospital, and Eden does support medical aid in dying. Incredible. They have their own physicians that will actually be providers. We have come, our Whatcom hospice has come so far, and I'm biased because I work for them, and they're a wonderful hospice, but there was a point maybe in 2010 and 11 and 12 where their nurses couldn't even tell patients that this was an option. They weren't allowed to speak the words. Now they not only can tell them, but they are allowed to be present on the day of graduation, and technically they have to leave the room when the patient drinks the medication. Although I have to say, in my 30 or 40 deaths, I've never had a hospice nurse leave the room. They just wink at me and they say, yeah, I'm supposed to leave, and here I am. Because they all support it so much. The chaplains support it, the social workers support it. And it's the bishops at the corporate level that do not. And so I just want to say that there sometimes is movement in terms of some of these Catholic institutions, and I can't speak for the ones in Seattle, but I know that Virginia Mason, they won't even let us call them. Like, we made the mistake of calling because we had patients from Virginia Mason, and they will slam the phone down in our ear. So we don't touch Virginia Mason. I believe they were taken over by the Franciscans. And it is against these people's religious beliefs, and they still see it as suicide. And I'm hoping that you will all leave here tonight knowing it is not suicide. By the way, I also want to stress that once you contact End of Life Washington, or if you use the law, the medical aid in dying, it is totally 100% confidential. And so we tell people you can mention it in the obituary or not, but more and more people are, which I think is great. And you are free to tell anyone you want that your family member used this, but we will never. I mean, because I have some of my patients up here are friends of mine, and I would never tell someone else, oh yeah, they They were a client of mine with End of Life Washington. They used medical aid in dying. It is totally, totally confidential. So I just want to quickly, in a few minutes, just tell you, because one of the other blessings of being in Washington State, and I am grateful every day for living in this state for many reasons. And Chris, I know that you're in Arizona, and I don't know if you have these options, but in 2019, Seattle became the first state to recognize and regulate and allow terramation, which is human composting, or it's specially known as NOR, which is natural organic reduction. And we now have 3 facilities in Seattle that will allow you to be composted after death. And if you know, I don't have much time left, but if you, I think you can all go to archives in the Seattle Times. And there was a Pacific Northwest magazine in December of 2024, just recently. And the whole magazine is devoted to these 3 methods, aquamation, terramation, and natural burial, the whole magazine. And it talks about the 3 facilities in King County. It gives you all the statistics about them, how much it costs. So if you're interested, go to the archives of the Seattle Times. They did a great job on this. But I want to tell you about this because I know so many of the UCC churches are very involved in climate, well, the climate change issues and environmental issues. And what is so exciting about these 3 new methods that we are now available in Washington State, 12 states now have this, but we were the first, of course, is because aquamation, which is using water, heat, and alkaline chemicals to dissolve the body. And what you are left with is just like in cremation, you are left with a container of powder. So you can spread the ashes, so to speak, but that is the one that is least carbon intensive. And it's really, I mean, it doesn't, cremation is not carbon friendly. So one of the options is natural burial, which we have up here in Whatcom County, and I believe you have it down there, which is when there is no vault, no embalming, and no casket. I mean, people usually use shrouds or pine boxes, and then there's a tree planted on top of the earth. But it is burial. And that is considered an environmentally friendly way to deal with the body. And then there is terramation, which is the composting. And right now you have 3 facilities in Seattle: Recompose, Return Home, and Earth. I have investigated all 3 extensively. I have visited them. I had a friend who, a retired physician who died. He fell down his stairs and became a quadriplegic, and he used medical aid in dying about 2 years ago. And he was the first person I knew to be composted. And I went to his funeral at Recompose, and it was one of the most beautiful funerals I've ever been to. And afterwards, well, Recompose gives you about a pickup load of compost. And so his family gave it to his family and friends in Seattle, and they drove the pickup truck up to Bellingham and gave it to us who were friends of his. And I got a lot of compost. And I have to tell you, as an avid gardener, I have never seen such beautiful compost in my life. It was the richest, most beautiful compost. And I put it around all my Japanese maples because that's what he loved. And I realized when I experienced this that this is what I wanted. I wanted my friends to have compost after I die. And then whatever compost is not used for all 3 facilities in Seattle, they have legacy forests that they're what's the word? They're planting trees, and they're rebuilding these forests outside of King County, and that's where the rest of the compost goes. So you are nurturing the earth after you die. And I will tell you this, that it takes 1 to 2.5 months, which is for the body to be totally decomposed and to have compost. And that is the downside for some people because they want closure more quickly than that. Aquamation happens very quickly, and natural burial happens very quickly. So again, there's 3 facilities: Recompose, Return Home is in Auburn, and then Earth. And I will say, having researched all 3, I am a huge fan of Return Home. I think, and they each use a different process. They have different facilities. You have to have a huge facility, almost like huge plant because they do like 30 bodies at a time. But all 3 of these places will let you go through their facility to see it. And so before you make a decision, I have done in my advanced planning, I have already paid for terramation, and there's a new funeral director up here in Whatcom County who will transport the body down to Seattle, uses Return Home, and then supports, and they also do aquamation. And so we have a funeral home up here that is only doing environmentally friendly disposals of bodies. So any questions on after death options? Because we are blessed to have a lot of options in this state. Any questions or comments on these? I have to look in the. Okay, so again, I refer you to the Seattle Times December 19th Sunday magazine, which gives you all the information you ever wanted to know about all 3 of these.
And Janet, Catherine has a question, has her hand up. Go
Hi,
ahead,
Janet.
Catherine.
I'm from Bellingham too, and was a hospice nurse, but that's beside the point at the moment. If you will your body to science, can it, after they have done whatever they can do with the body, can it then go to one of these places for composting or natural burial?
You know, that's a great question, and I can just tell you, before we had these options, I had willed my body to science, and so did my spouse. No, and for the company that we used, they used cremation, and they went through a local Moles funeral home, and they did cremation. So I got my spouse's ashes back. I don't know if they are now adding these options. So you would have to check with whatever organization you're using to will your body. It's a
Okay.
great question, and I can't answer it, so I don't know.
Okay.
Anybody else have questions I can't answer?
Just do a time check. We're about 2 minutes before the hour, and I just want to be. Oh, Chris, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Just a quick question. What's the difference between cremation and the other resources or sources that you have?
Well, cremation puts a lot of carbon into the atmosphere because you're using fire and you're burning.
Okay,
And
I
aqua
did know that. Mhm.
and electricity, and terramation uses grass and weeds and
Okay,
compost. Okay.
thank you.
Any other questions? Quick questions?
I have one quick question. This is Chris KT.
Okay.
Cost wise.
Yeah, good question. These are not cheap. I mean, cremation is still the cheapest thing to do with your body. I would refer you to the Seattle Times article because they really varied in price. I was amazed how much they vary, but I would, depending on how far they have to transport your body to these 3 facilities, it's about $2,000 to $6,000.
Okay,
So it's more than cremation.
thank you.
And Marilee, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I have, and I'm part of a study for long-term aging, and they, when they're done with it, they want to just send you to a home. I mean, to a facility, for what do I call it? all I can think of is nursing home. No, but
Like a funeral home?
a funeral home. Yeah. Okay. And my funeral home that I have prepaid services with have the term what is that called? The composting one. So you know, you can donate your body to them, and if you've talked with the organization, then when they finish with it, they just call your funeral home. They come pick up the body and do whatever that.
Okay. That's good to know, Marilee. Thank you.
It may be something that will change over time as
Yeah.
well. It becomes more popular.
The article in the Seattle Times referred to that some of these three facilities are connected with funeral homes and some are not. But all three of the owners said this is going to be the trend, that this is going to be an option offered by, they will partner with funeral homes. So like the funeral home up here in Whatcom County, they will partner with funeral homes to offer this because it's becoming very popular in Washington State, as you can imagine. Any other final questions? Well, it's 8 o'clock, so we're done.
It is. So let me just say thank you so much, Janet, for giving us your time and your attention and all of your
Thank
knowledge.
you.
What an amazing presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for caring, everybody, and coming to this because it really is important.
Thank you, Janet.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody, for coming tonight. Good night.
It's together, Marcy. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Janet. Good night.